This program is What Hiring Managers Wish You Knew, which is sponsored by the New York Black Librarians Caucus, the Academic and Special Library section, the Leadership and Management section, the new members of NYLA Roundtable, and the Suffolk County Library Association. And without further ado, I will turn things over to Sandra Michele Echols.
Hello, everyone. How are you? Can you hear me? Good. All right. So I am Sandra Michele Echols. I am the immediate past president of the New York Black Librarian Caucus. And in addition, I'm currently our conference gala chair. Would like to tell you that welcome you to the presentation, What Hiring Managers Wish You Knew. I have an esteemed panel of colleagues here. We have Mrs. Simone Yearwood, Michael Miller, and Moddie Breland. And so without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Simone Yearwood, and they will all introduce themselves.
You're muted.
Stuff on mute to avoid my dog from interfering. Okay, hi everyone. Thank you for coming. Thank you for joining us today. We decided to create this informal panel just to have a chat. All three of us, and we'll introduce ourselves individually, have experience as hiring managers. I'm currently the Deputy Chief Librarian at City University of New York, Queens College. I've been with Queens for 23 years, believe it or not. It seems like yesterday, but it was 23 years ago. I started as support staff, made my way into faculty position, and I've been very, very busy. I've definitely been very, very busy. What I am really happy about for this session is just last week I had a panel to serve on a search committee. So my experience is recent. And part of what we're going to do is just explain to you some of the things that we've encountered. I've been on maybe 24 search committees, hiring paraprofessionals, faculty, and administrators. And these are just some of the things that I'll be interested in determining what I'm looking for when I meet with a candidate, or especially my selling point is when I see a candidate's application. And I'm gonna move it over to Michael and let him do an introduction for himself. Michael.
Thanks, Simone. Hey, everyone. Happy to be here. Glad you all could make it. Again, I am with CUNY as well. I'm the librarian at the Bronx Community College right now. I have about a 15 to 16 year history with CUNY. Came in as head of access services at Queens College, moved up through tenure and promotion, and eventually stepped sideways in the system to become the interim chief at Bronx, and eventually applying for the job and landing it for the permanent position of chief librarian until such time. And my experience with searches, of course, have been across the board, much like Professor Yearwood's. I am the hiring manager for all of the full-time, part-time, both permanent as well as adjunct staff. And I've also been on search committees for faculty from other subject departments outside the library, as well as a couple of administrative positions on the Bronx campus. So that's the short for me. Moddie?
Hi, everyone. My name is Moddie Breland, and I am the head librarian at the Bronx campus of Mercy College. The main campus of Mercy College is in, I don't know if you're familiar with it, it's in Dobbs Ferry, New York. Dobbs Ferry is in Westchester, and it's about 20 miles outside of New York City. I have been at Mercy College for 4.5 years, and I've been working in academic libraries for about 15 years. I started off as a paraprofessional at Queens College under Simone Yearwood, and I have been on numerous search committees and numerous, I've been a hiring manager for numerous positions. And I am glad to be here. And I'll turn it over to Simone.
Turning off my mute. Okay, I think we just want to start this informally, and we'll start it from the point of our panel title, What Hiring Managers Wished You Knew. And one of the things that I wished you knew as a hiring manager is the most important piece of the puzzle for me is your cover letter. And that's where it starts for me, your cover letter, where you get your opportunity to sell yourself to me. And I always consider anyone applying for a position, it should be twofold. And if you're the right candidate and you have enough confidence in yourself, you're auditioning for the people that you will be interviewing with, but they should also be auditioning for you, because you don't want to put yourself in a position, just consider how much time we spend in the office. We spend so many hours at work with our colleagues. Imagine being in a place where you, and I'm going to try to be PC, where you dislike more than half of them. That would make it a tedious day. So when you go out for a position, you should really be looking at all aspects of that position. You should try to look to see who your colleagues may potentially be. And as I started off this, your cover letter gives me an opportunity to learn a little bit more about yourself. I don't really learn too much about what you say when you put down one of your positions and you have these lists of qualifications. Most of them oftentimes seems rehearsed based on the position qualifications, but your cover letter, to me, it should have a personal feel. It should definitely just sort of add those extra tips. Sometimes in a cover letter, someone may have the opportunity to explain why there's a lapse in service, whether they took a year or two off to take care of a family member or start a family, whatever the case is. That's where you put that in your cover letter. You get the ability to just sort of say, hey, this is why you see this in my, on my portfolio. So that's my selling point. That's my priority selling point, your cover letter. It gives me the opportunity to sort of do a checklist. Yes, you have this experience and that experience and that experience, but overall, this is a bit of a personal piece for me. And I take it very seriously. I highlight it, I make notes, and oh gosh, I hate to admit this, but I kind of just browse the resume itself. The resume is just a quick glance, but the cover letter is what's personal for me and where I really get my feedback from. Michael?
Okay. I guess what I would say is what's important for me and what I hope you know, it comes from across the whole experience of being employed somewhere. So beyond the actual hiring process and into actually working together over the longer period. All of these elements can be kind of felt or known at the beginning, but you're never really 100% sure until you're into the relationship and the back and forth is going on for a period of time. So what I'm interested in is making sure that a person that's hired for my library really, for lack of a better phrase, has a great scouting mentality. And for me, I'm kind of ADHD. I like to follow rules. So if you give me a list of rules and I know that I can study them and then I can do everything in my power to individually attempt to accomplish what's required, collaborate with other people, seek advice, then I know that if I'm checking off all the right boxes for my particular institution that I've decided to align with, that I should be treated fairly, and that I will also be respecting other people that are doing the same kind of procedure. So that's what I mean by scouting mentality. Here at CUNY, we know the Board of Trustees bylaws and the faculty roles and the leadership roles. And we know then the union contract and what all of the tenure and promotion guidelines are that thread out from the contract. Each of the campuses then has their own plan. Governance happens locally. So all three levels have to be known. And so the candidate and eventual hiree needs to become familiar with the playing ground in order to be able to do their job correctly, at least technically. And then moving beyond the scouting mentality, I've had various experiences where this has become very important. The factor of what's too good to be true. So in a interview stage, are you really doing backflips that are unbelievable? Or are you presenting yourself with confidence in a measured way to let people know what your strengths and weaknesses are? Or is something just not ringing correctly? I don't know if we're supposed to go through all of our areas, Simone, or if we do one at a time.
I think we can do one at a time while we have the
Okay, so let me pass over to Moddie. He'll start his list and go on.
Yes. So one of the things I think is important for some candidates to know is that there's some preparation that needs to go in before the interview occurs. And I think one of the things that's extremely important is researching the organization or the library before you come to that position. It's very important because if you have researched the library or the organization that you're getting into, that will be helpful in answering some of the questions that are posed to you in an interview. It also will allow you to be able to ask questions at the end of the interview. That's extremely important, is to be able to create questions in the interview of areas in which you're not familiar with the library or the organization that you're applying to. It's very important that you have a great understanding of where you are potentially going to be working. Another thing that I think is kind of important too, especially during the interview process, is familiarizing yourself with the resume and cover letter you've written. A lot of times when you're applying for a job, this is not the only job you're applying for. You may be applying for others. So you have kind of a cookie cutter cover letter or resume. And before you get to the interview process, you want to make sure that you remembered all of the key points in your resume, because the hiring manager is definitely going to ask questions about your resume, especially if there's gaps in employment, or if you didn't really elaborate on a position. The hiring manager is definitely going to want to see how you would fit in their organization, and also how those things that you listed on your resume, how does that fit with the job that you're applying for? And with that said, you should make sure that you have examples of how your resume, your cover letter, how some of the things that you have done, how that fits into the organization, and have examples of how you've led a team, how you've resolved conflicts, how you've multitasked. So having examples of all of the things that you've had on your resume or that you've identified in your cover letter, make sure that you can cite examples of that. Simone?
So I have a question for the panel from Jessica Hoffman. Jessica would like to know, are there any examples of personal touches or details from cover letters that you found particularly exceptional that you're willing to share? So I will take that and start off. Simone was talking about cover letters first, so we'll take that around the panel. Simone, what did you find?
Well, yes, I would be able to, but of course you would, you should probably put your email in the chat, or I will put my email in the chat. You reach out to me directly, and then I can share that with you. And one of the reasons that I have a P&B meeting in 15 minutes that I'm going to be late to, but that's okay. So one of the things about it is everyone typically on the search committee starts with a cover letter. As a matter of fact, in most instances, if the cover letter is not submitted, your entire application could be rejected. But yes, I can definitely share some tidbits of what I'm looking for in a cover letter. It's almost alluded to what Moddie just said about the cover letter being able to explain gaps in services, cover letter being able to really elaborate, not only because remember, on your resume, you're sort of selling the qualifications that we are asking you for in the position, but you also have an opportunity to sell yourself to let us know what other additional qualifications you have that we didn't ask you about. And, you know, just consider, and the three of us are in academia, and in academic positions, the interview can most often it's sometimes a full day process where you go through the day. You start with the search committee, you meet with if you're going to be chairing a department, you meet with the department, you meet with the provost or the dean. So there are a number of people that you meet, and so it's a very tedious day, and having things on that cover letter that they can go back to is definitely a selling point.
All right, so Moddie, I'd like to ask you, what do you think about that, the cover letter? Are you willing to share, like, give a little tip to the audience, like, don't hold back, give something that you might find that was that striking that you want to point out in a cover letter that someone just nails it in their cover letter?
So for me, when a position has been posted, there are a lot of applications that come through. And so in order to drill down to what are the first pile of people who will potentially be hired or considered for an interview, I should say, you want to make sure that your cover letter and your resume address the position that you're going for. Your cover letter, I like to see bullet points of how you actually, a paragraph of an introduction, and then bullet points of how you meet the qualifications of the position. I think lists are important, especially when the hiring manager has to look through a list of resumes, a whole host of resumes, cover letters. You want to make sure that all of the skills and experiences that you've had that are germane to the position that you're applying, that's in the front, that's first and foremost. I'm not a firm believer in a cover letter being more than one page. I know that some people are, but I think a cover letter should be concise, because especially for certain positions, there are a lot of applications that come in. And if there are a lot of applications that come in, people are not going to take the time to read a whole laundry list of things that you had on your resume or that you have on the cover letter. So to get in that initial pile of maybes or this is definitely someone who I want to interview, you want to make sure that the information that's pertinent to the position is front and foremost in both your resume and the cover letter.
So we're on a hot topic with cover letters. So Michael, I would like to switch it up a little bit for you and ask you a question from Matthew Cassidy. I know that Simone answered in the chat about how long a cover letter should be, but in addition, I would like to also add on Mariana's, I cannot say her last name, I think it's Cecile. I'm sorry if I mispronounced it. And her question is, do you have any advice on how to present a previous unrelated career in a cover letter or resume?
Sure. First, to the first question, I would just say, don't repeat your resume in your cover letter. Do show alignment, but don't just represent. Secondly, what I always really like about a cover letter is when something special they've done, either in their education or their career otherwise, is very unusual, or even a personal hobby. This has a little extra something to throw in there that's a human factor that the committee and the people will actually hook onto and remember you by, and we'll use as a for various chats. With regards to presenting prior experience, I would say it's just most important to, briefly introduce what that experience is. But then again, you're looking for the alignment factors. In my job at the airlines, I was a customer service rep, and therefore I'm going to be really good with customer relations if I'm the head of access services. Or in my job in this computing company, I was really involved with troubleshooting interfaces and technologies. So as your technology librarian, those experiences about breaking down barriers for technology services are important. Just really tie it in with a good alignment to the current job, as Moddie was talking about.
Right. And Michele, I'd also like to say something that you may want to try to get into the habit of is if you can align yourself with a mentor, someone that you can ask to review the job application, the job posting itself, and then your personal CV or resume. I think we have issues sometimes where, well, and I'm not going to date myself, but back in the day, we used to say, oh, resume should not be more than 1, perhaps 2 pages. And nowadays, if you sent a professional resume that was a single page, they probably wouldn't even really seriously look at it. Now we encourage, as Michael was just alluding to, a plethora of expertise, that something you did in one position will be very helpful in another position. And you need to be mindful of that. And having someone that can look over your resume to sort of give you the guidance is very, very crucial. And as a sidebar, I would just like to share the relationship between myself, Michael, and Moddie. And we all work together at Queens College. Michael coming in as the head of access services. He was the access services librarian. At the time, I was support staff, and I was in the professional title of support staff eventually. And then I supervised Moddie, who was also support staff. So we sort of had this little mentoring going back and forth unknowingly. It just by happenstance. And then we came to find ourselves in 3 leadership positions years later. So being able to rely on people that can sort of guide you, tell you, yes, this position is for you, or no, that's probably not right, or letting you know what might stick out in an application. It's very, very helpful. And Moddie said this earlier that I wanted to piggyback on, is when you are submitting your resume, your cover letter, it's very, very important that you go over it and that you recognize, because I can't tell you how turned off I am when I get I'm hiring an electronic resources librarian, and then I look in your resume and I see, or your cover letter especially, and I see you giving me information as if you're applying for an archives position. It either tells me that you've been just a little tad bit sloppy, or you sort of you're desperate and you're applying for anything that comes out there. You don't want that to show. I mean, this is a very competitive, especially the field of librarianship. It's very, very competitive. So you just want to make sure that, you have crossed all your T's and dotted all your I's, because people are looking for that, and you're being weighted. And you want to make sure that your weight is at the higher level as opposed to the lower level.
So with that said, I have a question for you, and I think everyone here in the room might want to also know the answer to this one. So suppose you don't have a certain set of skills, right? How do you develop the skills you're lacking for a position in academia? If I'm a public librarian and I'm interested in coming to work in the academic library, how can I develop some of the skills that I might be lacking?
So I'll start. I can say that one of the things, if you're a public librarian and you want to develop the skills to become an academic librarian or a law librarian, It's important to do professional development programs, especially if you intend to apply to an academic library relatively soon. So you've been a public librarian for 2 years, and there's a posting that's coming up in an academic library, and they're not expecting for that academic librarian to start until a year from now or 6 months from now. It will probably be a good idea to start to show that you are taking these professional development programs, these seminars, webinars, so that you can put this on your resume, that you have some training in some of the areas that are needed for that particular position. So making sure that that's something that you can talk about, that you can put on your resume as things that you have done.
And I would also add, perhaps, especially if you're still in the graduate library school program, internships. Internships are fantastic ways of gaining that experience within a library. Because to be honest with you, and I think there is a book out there, Everything They Didn't Tell You in Library School. And we all know, for those of us that have gone through the program, that half of the classes that you took in library school, you were unable to use anything that you learned when you actually started the job. So being able to affiliate yourself with a program like at Queens, we're starting, we're going to try to start a new program sort of similar to librarians in training. And we're hiring graduate library school students, and we're inviting them to library faculty meetings, committee meetings, department meetings, so that they can get the inside look, so they can figure out what they need to do to try to, expand their own experience if they're interested in staying in academia. Michael, did you have?
Yeah, the only thing I would add to all of this is that as you're thinking about professional development and advanced credentialing, that comes with a mindset. Again, and this is kind of my third point from what I think you should know, and that is you need to present yourself as someone that's flexible, that you can change with the times, that you can meet people in the middle. And that's just one of the categories that we think about for, I guess, the psychological profile of, the great employee that we want to work with for quite some time. Flexibility is good, but don't forget about emotional intelligence, sensitivity. Do you have a sense of fairness? Do you have a respectfulness in your disposition as you're working with people? I think all of these things are really, really important as you go forward. As you get into a job, things are going to change. Our profession is changing constantly. So all of these qualities are really, really important to me. If there's some way you can touch on some of these in your interview process, but also own them and present them throughout your engagement with the position.
All right, thanks, panel. So Michael D has a question. He says, so if one page is too short for a resume, what is the norm now, or what is recommended? And I would like to add on to that question, what is some of the key words that you would recommend that should be on a resume for someone who's looking for a job in academia? Because we know, I don't know if your institution used the applicant tracking system, but somebody else's institution may use the applicant tracking system, and having those keywords on your resume would be advantageous for an individual. So I'll open it up to the panel.
Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I think I went through a list of some ideas already: the emotional intelligence, the sensitivity, the fairness, the respectfulness, the flexibility. All of those would be great things to pepper in meaningfully when you're developing your cover letter. I don't mind a cover letter that goes beyond one page, as long as it's not dribbling on forever. And as long as what you have there is meaningful. Be concise, as Moddie said, but If there's something that's important for alignment with the job, include that. And if there's something, as I said before, what I like to see, something extra special or unique, include that. You'll get a sense of the fact that in this process, you want to develop a communication forum. And so it's the cover letter is the springboard to a long-term conversation. And so introduce what you think is important, but don't go on forever. That's my point of view.
Right. And I would jump off with it, and it's something that I think we can all start now. When in academia, you move away from a resume and it's more of a curriculum vitae, so your CV, and you're asked to submit necessarily your CV. And your CV is quite different from a resume. A resume just sort of says, I did this and this and this from this period to this period in this title. A CV, you can really go on, especially if you've taught, if you've done any type of presentations. Those things are posted right within that CV, and that's going to make your CV much longer than a standard resume. Now, something that's really annoying, and I'll be honest with you, so again, what hiring managers wish you knew, do not include, if you've done any publications, do not include the publication. Include the link to the publication. Give me the citation instead, if I can try to look that up myself, because remember, all of these resumes must be printed out. And if you decide that you have 2 or 3, 15-page publications that you decide to submit with your application, that can be quite annoying. Along with the fact that it should just be standard black and white. Some people want to put color in it. And remember, if I have to print all of this, and the cost of ink, no one's going to give you extra doggy points because you provided a pretty resume, because a pretty resume can be a useless resume as well. So just keep it simple and give me the facts. You don't have to give me the bells and whistles with it. And some of the key words from Michelle's question that I like to look for is someone who has the ability to learn, someone who says, I'm a team player, someone who says, I'm interested in learning more about something else. Those are people that I say, oh, wow, I can definitely work with. And on a side note, we just had earlier this year, a position for an electronic resources librarian. And within that pile, we found a candidate that, while she had the experience for e-resources, we also identified her skills as in web services, web and digital services. And by the powers that be, we were able to hire both of them. And so, and that came about from her subtly putting it in her cover letter, just sort of sharing her extra skills and expertise with us. So it could happen, and that's what or at least make sure that your resume is put off to the side should something else come up. That's what you want as well.
Okay. Question from Gina Nichols would like to know, how would you recommend a librarian applying for an assistant position? Do you recommend a librarian applying for an assistant position to get into a library? And yeah, and then I'll give you the other questions after that. So would you recommend someone applying for an assistant position? In other words, I think taking a position lower than what their title is currently?
Yes, I think the more experience you have, the better. And, the mentorship factor can come as well. If you're an assistant to an academic librarian, that mentorship can help you land another position. Also, if you want to move up in the organization, sometimes it may be difficult. It depends on if it's a public or private, but it's definitely having your foot in the door, making connections with the, in the instance of an academic library, making connections with the librarians, the faculty there. That's a good way of moving up and moving forward, and also determining if that's what you want to do. So being a library assistant somewhere It allows you to see if this is, you know, where you want to be, whether it's public librarianship, academic librarianship, special librarianship. So I think it is a good idea because it will show that you have experience. You know, you'll be able to put that on a future resume.
All right, thanks. I have a question from Brianna Moore, which is, as a hiring manager, how do you handle overwhelming amount of resumes?
I can just tell you that you have to be specific with how you're posting your job description. So prior to posting the job, there's a committee that meets, and we have to go over every aspect of that job. And one of the easy things about it is when it's over, when you received your applications, there's a grid that you go through, and on your grid, we have, these are the qualifications that every candidate must have, and it's a yes or no question. And if they have those qualifications, then fine, you can continue to look at their resumes. If they do not have those qualifications, you can stop looking. So you don't have to review all of them. But even though you've gone through that process, you still end up with a large amount of papers, of resumes and candidates, applicants, and it is what it is. I actually am not necessarily upset if I can find and weed through to find that talented candidate, because for everyone, it's hit or miss. I mean, unless you've known them in a different light. And I have been on a search where I personally knew one of the applicants. And thankfully for me, I was able to keep my bias aside. And I was actually one of the advocates that said I didn't think she had the qualifications, that there were other people that had more qualifications. So I didn't have to feel any allegiance. But you know, you want a lot of applications because you want to weed out and find that perfect candidate. You're never going to find the perfect candidate, but you will find someone that can eventually become a colleague.
Okay, I have a question. Leslie Fishman wants to know, are there any agencies available that can help compiling a professional CV that you may know about? And then Peter Rundle would like to know, how do you, as a hiring manager, handle red tape when it comes to the hiring process?
So Michael, do you want to talk about that?
Well, I can talk about the first one, maybe. I don't know about agencies, and I don't know personally, I've not heard of anyone using one, but I would think what I would want to look for is kind of like a professional association mentoring body of some sort. For me, mentoring has been very challenging throughout my career. I couldn't find someone above me permanently that I felt comfortable with over time to bounce questions off of. So I think you have to look far and wide to find mentors, and you know, getting feedback could be as much as like going to I don't know, chat rooms or discussion lists from NYLA or ALA or any of the Black Caucus, or see if there are people that are advertising some kind of mentoring or job prep stuff, and try to, you know, just if you know someone in a library, ask them to look at it, ask them to refer you to someone else for external validity. You really have to look far and wide for your mentoring opportunities.
And I'm unsure about the red tape, but depending on your institution, there is a lot that you have to go through for the hiring process itself. And so when you make note of getting through the red tape, everything is pretty much right there from the beginning. You go in expecting the candidate that you are interested in, and it goes from there, because you remember it can start with a 30-minute meet and greet, so to speak, where you're asked some initial questions just to sort of get to know your personality. And then it expands to an in-house, again, full day, that's lunch. And you have to even remember that when you're having lunch, which can sometimes come across as a social setting, people are watching you. They're looking at how you interact with others. They're looking at what you do. And when, you know, whether or not you're impulsive, whether or not you, and Michael, I think, started it off with like being genuine, trying not to oversell yourself. That's definitely key. And one thing that I would like to also point out, I find, and I'm not going to make this about race, but I do find that I know some talented people who refuse to submit an application because they feel that they don't have all of the qualifications. And oftentimes, you don't have to have every single qualification. What you have to have is the ability to learn what you don't have. Now, I'm saying that if I'm hiring a web and digital services librarian, and you don't know the tech talk about how to post a page and how to edit a page, how to do, you know, that's just taboo. But if there's just one or two, let's say, software features that you're unfamiliar with, it's okay for you to still apply. And if you get that interview, you do your due diligence and you learn how to do it. You know, you learn how to do it, because especially in academia, a job posting will go out. Sometimes we're mandated to keep it up for as long as 60 days. And within those 60 days, we can't tell you anything about it. We can't tell you whether or not you've been, you know, hired, you know, whether you're going to be invited. We can't tell you whether or not we've hired anyone. And so it might take about 4 months from start to finish before we can send you a thank you, no thank you letter. And so that's where your patience comes in, and that's on a good day. So your patience is also necessary from that perspective as well. But I say that if you think you meet at least 3/4 of the qualifications, I say you go for it. You submit that application. If they accept it, they accept it. If they don't, they don't. But if you don't try, you don't have an opportunity. So, you know, make sure, you know, just have faith in yourself that you are good enough. And this is coming from someone who I honestly feel that I'm overconfident.
All right. With that said, Ms. Simone, no one has really talked, you all three have talked about networking and the importance of finding a great mentor, or even some people call them accountability coaches, because that's someone that stays along with you a long time. What about references? You know, all the positions that when you apply in academia require that you have 3 references, right? How should you maintain relationships to build those quality references that you would need when you're applying in academia?
So references are extremely important, and it can be the make or break to getting a job. And it's important before you list references for a position that those references, that you've contacted them, that you've shared your resume cover letter with them, that you have discussed the position with them and showed them the job posting. And this is important because you want to make sure that your references can speak to how you would be a successful candidate in the position you're applying for. If you are listing a reference that might not be familiar with librarianship or how librarianship works, unless it's a character reference, typically that might not be the best reference to use, because as a hiring manager, when I call to speak to a reference and it's a librarian position, I would like to know, you know, what kind of skills did this person show you that you think would make them comfortable with this type of position, whether it's a leadership position, whether it's a reference and instruction position. How do you, how do you feel about their skills in this particular position? So it's very important about who you choose as a reference, and staying in contact with that reference. You know, references are extremely important. Making sure that you touch base with people that you've left. So if you're in your second or third job, making sure that those who you knew well on your prior jobs, making sure that you stay in contact with them, sending them a contact message every now and then, just to touch base to see how they're doing. I know I have done that with some of the librarians that I have worked with over the years, just so that if in the future, if I need a reference, there's someone who I can touch base with. And that, you know, after not speaking to them for 5 or 6 years, I send them an email and say, I'd like you to be a reference. So anyone who could potentially be a reference, you want to make sure you stay in contact with.
Right. And to follow up with that as well, anytime you're going to post a position post your resume with someone listed as a reference, you should reach out to that person to let them know I've listed you as a resume, especially for the contact information, because, you know, oftentimes you gave a reference to a previous position and that person has left that position, and the only information you've given us is that work information. And we have to come back to you and say, hey, can you update your information? That's not something that you necessarily want someone to do. So before you put your reference list down, you should definitely reach out to that person, let them know I'm applying for this position. Is it okay? Don't just assume that it's a blanket. Like I said yes to you, as Moddie said, I said yes to you 5 years ago, and 5 years later, things have changed in my life, in your life. Unfortunately, I may barely remember you. You just want to make sure that you keep those contacts up to date.
All right. Brenda Bruss asks, is it still a standard practice to send a thank you note to the person who interviewed you for a position?
Yes, it's very impressive. I'm sorry, and Moddie, I'm going to let you jump in as well. I am so impressed. Not only, you know, candidates who not only send it to, let's say, the chair of the search committee, that they'll send an email to each individual person, which means as they were meeting with us, they wrote down our names, then they took the time to look on our website and find our emails and sent us individual thank you letters, not just a blanket letter to the library chair or the chair of the search committees. It is so important. And in the back of my mind, even though it's not my selling or breaking point, I'm impressed when I see that.
Yeah, you definitely want to set yourself apart from the other applicants, and that's definitely one way to do it. Also, a thank you note gives you an opportunity to perhaps emphasize a point that you missed during the interview, or address a question, especially if it's personalized to specific members on the search committee. You can, if there was a question that you weren't confident in answering, or if there was something you could not answer, and it was posed by someone on the search committee, you can use a thank you note to send to that individual and say, on second thought, this is some of the things that, you know, I thought about after our interview, or this is some of the things that I'd like to emphasize. And again, thank you notes, you know, they go a long way because it will set you apart. It will set your application apart. Many times in searches, especially when there are a lot of applicants, it comes down to 2 or 3 people. And you definitely want a thank you note in your corner that someone could say, yeah, well, they at least sent me a thank you note. So this is something we should consider.
So, Michael, you want to add to thank you note, or we can move on from thank you notes?
I would only say one other thing. Every once in a while, I have been in an interview and I think maybe I misinterpreted something or didn't give them everything I thought I should have told them. And I'll use that thank you note, the follow-up, to add a little bit to one of the questions. So, you know, it's just another opportunity. Don't pass it up if you think you can add something concisely and quickly.
All right. So we have about 10, 11 minutes left. I don't know if we have any more questions from the audience. If you do have questions, please type them in and I will field them to our panel. So we talked about what you didn't like, what you wish people, the title of the program is what you wish people knew before applying for these positions. So you talked about your cover letters, you talked about resumes, you talked about what are some interviewing strategies? We didn't talk about interviewing strategies. What are some of the strategies that you would like to see people come in with when they're interviewing with you? Heather just put a question in, Heather Owens, and she asked, what advice would you have for a new librarian, MLIS student, when it comes to crafting resumes and CVs? But you touched on that, but I guess she wants to know about a student who's recently applying, just got out of school. But my other question that I asked about, because you didn't talk about interviewing skills, like what do you wish somebody knew when they came in and they were interviewing, they're sitting in front of you, and what do you wish they knew about interviewing?
For me, I always say it's the same thing, and that I sort of look at when I'm teaching. And I say you should have yourself a pad and paper, because you want to take those notes. You want to write down the questions that are posed to you, so that when you are answering, you can constantly look down and remember what the question was. Because I often see that some interviewees forget the question. But if they have a pad and they wrote down the question, they're talking from a confident position because they remember the question and they don't have to ask that it be repeated. So someone that comes prepared. I also say, if just in case, bring yourself a bottle of water. Don't be afraid to ask for water, because it's a very intimidating process. You're really hopeful and you want to sell yourself. So don't be afraid to ask questions as well. And come with a certain level of confidence. And remember, confidence and cockiness and conceitedness are different. But a certain level of confidence where you sit up, definitely look people in the eye. And one of my big issues that I look for is people that are constantly saying, at some point, I actually start counting the ums, and that's not a good thing, because it's distracting, because I'm not listening to you. I'm taking note of how often you use that phrase. So prepping yourself, talking yourself through it, asking for a moment to go into the bathroom to give yourself a chance to exhale, and then come back out there confidently. So those are some really good, you see how I just said it? Some really good interviewing skills. Michael?
I would say that for early career people, take any experience that you've had either in your internship or your other courses that may have had experiential learning, and draw on the content of courses to align to the job ad. So just because you're starting doesn't mean you don't have an idea of the concepts. And then with the interviewing, just if you have to say no, don't worry about saying no, because that's honest and real. And I want to see someone that's comfortable with being honest. But then also, if there are challenge areas, maybe you can quickly say, but I would be able to try this, or but I would be able to take this other experience and try to apply it appropriately. Again, that's the flexibility stuff. What I really don't like is when I can feel that someone trying to get through with something that's not 100% true.
Moddie, you want to touch on that? And then if you do, I have a question for you to answer for Leslie Fishman. So Leslie Fishman asks, is it acceptable to act like you're also interviewing the manager also and ask straightforward questions?
Yes, it is definitely important that you ask straightforward questions. And I don't think that you really want to make it so obvious that you're interviewing as an interviewee, you're interviewing the person who's interviewing you. I don't think you want to make it quite as obvious, but you want to make sure that, and this is where it comes back to researching the organization before you start the interview, but you want to make sure that the questions that you ask resonate with the interviewer in the sense that they can tell that you've been doing your homework. They can tell that you are interested in understanding how you would fit into the organization. So it is important.
Yes. One thing that I like and what impresses me when the interviewee, and just remember, I think we've all been saying that you should come prepared and you should expect the committee to ask you, like, okay, they're gonna carve out a time for you to pose questions. And the most impressed I've ever been is when someone said, what are your plans? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? What's going on with your library and its strategic planning? And it was like, whoa. And that put us all on the spot, and it made us all sort of take a step back. But then it also opened up an opportunity for us to talk about our strategic plan, which this individual actually found and was able to ask us questions about it. So how do you intend to fulfill this plan? And it was like, okay, I definitely like this person. I definitely like this person, because it shows that they're thinking about their own careers. And it's a difference with people who just simply are looking for a job, and someone who really wants to just be a part of your organization, join you, have that family-like atmosphere, and we are all one cohesive team. And so that's the candidate, and that candidate that took the time to really do that homework shows due diligence, not someone who's just trying to, again, just get a job.
So last question, because we have 4 minutes left, and it's coming from Denise. Denise would like to know, if you feel the interview didn't go well, is it okay to ask, are there any qualities you're looking for that you don't feel I have?
Wow.
It's an interesting one.
I'll repeat it again for you.
No, we heard it.
You got it? Oh, you heard? I just want to break it down for you. Oh.
Yeah, I got, you know what I think it is? I think that's something that you should try to ask after the interview, because I actually think it's okay to contact someone if you've been told that you haven't received the position, you're not going to be offered the position. If you would say, hey, can I talk to you for a few minutes? I just want to know, what was it? What didn't I have? What was it about the other candidate? What was the selling point for you that you chose them over me? Because in that way, you get to sort of enhance your own skills. And one thing I'll say before we break this up, Sandra Michele, thank you, publicly thank you for moderating for us. But also, you know, she's starting her own business as a coach. So you all may want to take down her email or something and shoot her a message. I think we should all put our own emails in the chat as well, if you want to reach out to any of us, or it should be on our bios. But you should reach out to people to find out what didn't work. That there's nothing wrong with that. Either they will answer you or they won't.
Hey, Simone, we're wrapping up. We have 2 minutes left. Are we going to do our shameless plug to highlight NYBLC's 50th anniversary?
Of course we can, please.
Okay. All right. So if you haven't heard, the New York Black Librarian Caucus is turning 50. We'll be celebrating with a virtual scholarship gala. Tickets are still on sale up until tomorrow. And it's Saturday, November 14th from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. Unfortunately, all the VIP tickets have been sold out. However, you still can purchase a ticket to participate in professional development, where you'll earn a CEU, as well as visit our author gallery walk. So we hope you will join us next Saturday, November 14th from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. Thank you, everyone. We have 1 minute and wrap up, final words, final thoughts from my panel for the last minute.
All I will say is that if you find a position that's really talking to you, just go for it. Even if you can't check off all of those boxes, go for it. You have an opportunity haven't submitted a resume than not, because you don't think you're good enough.
Michael,
I would
30
just,
seconds.
yep, I would just say be real. Do your homework, be concise, don't be scared. You know, as Simone said, we go through all kinds of background administrivia, and just because you don't get a job doesn't mean it was a blunder on your part. It just could be our process, the million candidates, and all that other things. So just keep trying.
Moddie, 30 seconds.
Just good luck with your search, and to make sure that, you know, you be honest. I think that's really one of the most important things is be honest in your interview and show who you are.
And then on that note, on behalf of the New York Library Association and NYBLC for putting on this panel, I would like to thank everyone for coming, and thank you and enjoy the rest of the conference. Take care. Bye now.
Thank you.